Hello everyone, this is the video for the pajama short project. This is one long video, but there'll be timestamps in the description for each step of the process. Let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have both pieces of your pajama shorts cut and ready to be sewn. For the purpose of this, I am using a busy pattern on one side so that you can see that there's clearly a wrong and that there is a right side to this. The purple line is the stitch line that we will be sewing on. There are also notches that are a little hard to see on camera, but I also notated the front and the back with an F and a B just in case. So now that we are ready to serge, there are only two parts that we are serging. We are serging down this curve edge and the side seam on both sides of the fabric. So it's just this curve and the side seam on both sides. I like to have my fabric that stays just on the edge of where the presser foot is, and the feed dogs will move it through the machine. And I will use my hand to guide it through the machine. From here, I like to have a big tail, and then I cut it off at the fabric. So now we have a serged edge. Now I'm going to move on to the crotch seam, which is the curve. Curves can be a little intimidating, but I promise that you can do this. So I am starting down here by the side seam, picking my presser foot back up, and setting my fabric in it, and pressing the foot down. Now I like to go slow on these parts just because I think it's easier and gives me more control. I also like to have the fabric on the table so that it doesn't weigh it down as much. When you start getting to the curve, I like to straighten out my fabric a bit so that it kind of creates like a straight line. So you're not necessarily sewing on a curve, but it's still a curve. And I like to take it slow and manipulate my fabric so that I have And now you have a serged crotch seam. So now that we have serged our pieces, we are ready to start sewing our inseams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my inseam piece and I'm going to make sure that my fabric is folded over, and I'm going to make sure I match my notches. I'm going to match the center notch to the other notch. And then I will pin through the fabric. Now I am going to match my corners, manipulating the fabric to make sure that my stitch lines are as precise as possible. And now I will do the top corner. From here, I like to do 2 pins along the stitch line. And now you have your pin piece, and we can move over to the sewing machine to sew this. So now we are ready to start sewing. I will be back stitching at the seam allowance, the stitch line, and seam allowance. So I'm going to put it under presser foot, put the presser foot down, stitch a bit, and then back stitch, and then continue on my way. From here, I'm going to back stitch at the stitch line, taking my pins out as I go. back stitch at the stitch line. Take your pin out. Stitch at the seam allowance. And now we're going to move over to the iron and press the seam open. From here, I like to use a hand to press my seam open. So what I'm going to do is open up my fabric and put this little hand in my fabric. I'm going to use my fingers to separate the seams and open them and kind of flatten them. And then I'm going to use the iron just to press it open. Now I'm going to flip it over onto the right side of the fabric and repeat the same step. This just ensures you have a nice even press throughout. And now we have a nice pressed seam. Now we're ready for the next step. You should have both pieces with the side seams sewn and pressed open. We are ready to start putting these together and sewing up the crotch seam. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want one piece that's still wrong side out and one piece that is right side out. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to take one piece. We're going to take our right-sided piece, and you're going to find the front side of it, and you're going to put this piece into your other piece, matching your fronts and matching your backs. We're not pinning just yet, but we're just going to kind of manipulate them where everything just lays together. So our right sides are together. And we're going to match up our notches. Okay, so for the most part, they are matching pretty well. From here, what we're going to do is we are going to pin our front notches. There should be 2 notches on the front and 3 notches on the back. So my front notches are pinned. I'm also going to pin up here at the waistband, or where we will be putting the waistband. Putting a notch there. Now moving on to the back. I like to use the middle notch as a guide. Pin there, and then pin the others. And sometimes you need to manipulate the fabric so that you're going through the stitch line and the notches. And then doing the top notch. And pinning there. Now from here, I like to pin the crotch seams. I find that that works pretty well, and it holds the press seams open. I like to do one on each side, going through that seam allowance that we pressed open. And on the other side of that seam. Now from here, you are able to pin truly however much you want. I like to pin at my corners again. From here, you are able just to pin your fabric. I personally like to do a couple pins just going along the stitch line, making sure that I am matching. That pin did not match. Now we are ready to sew up the crotch seam. We will be sewing from the front top, back stitching at the seam allowance and at the stitch line, sewing down the crotch to the back stitching at the stitch line and at the seam allowance. So now we are ready to start sewing. I am going to start off on my front piece. I'm going to put my presser foot down after I take my first pin out. We're going to make sure we back stitch seam allowance at the stitch line, and now we are going to sew through the crotch. curve, you want to just make sure you're taking your time. Again, remembering to backstitch at the stitch line and then at your seam allowance. And now you have your crotch seam sewn. And then we can move over to the iron and press the crotch seam open. So now we are ready to press our fabric. So what I'm going to do is I made sure that my shorts were taken apart and now resemble shorts. I'm going to use the hand and I'm just going to put it under the seams and I am going to press my seams open on both sides. Now I am going to press the crotch open first. So what I'm going to do is kind of just move the fabric to where I can get to the center of the crotch and open up the fabric and press that down. And now you're just going to press all your seams open and then repeat on the other side. Our last step before we move over to the waistband will be to sew a basting stitch down on the seam allowance. I have already done it on this side. Now I need to do on this side. You're just going to be doing a basting stitch at a length 4 without back stitching from the top to about 2 inches down. So what we're just going to do is pick up the presser foot, put it down without back stitching, and just sew a 4 length stitch. This will ensure that when we go to put the waistband in, that the seam allowance stays down and pressed. And now we can move over to our waistband. For the next step, you're going to need a measuring tape. You're going to put the measuring tape around your waist, your natural waist, which is usually where you bend, and find what your waist is in inches. From that number, you're going to subtract 1, and that will be how much elastic you need to cut for your waistband. For our next step, we are going to be pressing the waistband. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be pressing the top of the waistband down 1/4 of an inch. And I think a tool you have in your kit are the seam gauges, basically a mini ruler. We are going to be pressing them down 1/4 of an inch from up here. So basically what I'm just going to do is fold it over, measure out 1/4 of an inch, and then just press. And you're going to do that all the way around the top of your fabric. Now our next step, after we press the 1/4 inch down, we are going to press another 1 1/4 inch over. And then we are going to press it and then pin it. So we are going to fold our fabric over 1 1/4 inch. And then press that down. I'd like to start at the center just to give a good starting point. And then from there, I'm going to take a pin and pin in that little 1/4 inch that we folded previously. And then I'm going to do this all around the top of the shorts. Once you have pressed and pinned the top of your waist, we are ready to sew. But before that, you need to leave a small piece of the waistband open. What I like to do is do 2 vertical pins going through my fabric where I have enough space left open so that I can put the elastic through. So from here to here will be unstitched. So you're going to sew from here all the way around to the other side. So now we are ready to sew the waistband or the waist casing. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to make sure you're sewing where you did that 1/4 flip over or press. So not at the top of the fabric, but at this bottom edge. And you're going to make sure your machine is at a 3-length stitch, and you will sew around, making sure you backstitch and you leave that space open for the casing. Now that you're done sewing that casing, you're going to want to grab your elastic band, and you're going to want to grab 2 safety pins. What we're going to do is we're going to put the safety pin on one edge of the elastic, and where your casing, your opening is on your waistband, right here, you're going to start feeding the elastic through that casing you made. Now this other safety pin, I like to put it here just to kind of help you find it in case you lose it. The goal is to not lose your elastic, but sometimes it happens. So what we're just going to do is like feed the safety pin through the fabric and kind of bunch the fabric on top of the safety pin and move the fabric down with the elastic band moving in. Now that I got both elastic pieces through the fabric, I like to safety pin my elastic together while I adjust the fabric on the elastic. This part is a little tedious. It just takes you a second before you get it right. At this point, you can take out your basting stitches in your front and in your back. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put our 2 elastic bands on top of each other. We are going to pin them and then sew a little box around them. So I'm going to move the fabric down off of the elastic, and then I'm going to put the elastic underneath the presser foot, and then I'm going to sew a box. Now I'm going to pivot, so I'm going to put my needle in, pick up my presser foot, take my pin out, and turn the elastic. And I'm also going to backstitch again. And then I'm going to pivot yet again. I'm going to pick up my presser foot and turn my elastic all the way around. Putting my presser foot back down. Backstitching a bit. Presser foot back down. Pivoting one more time to close the box. I like to backstitch my elastic bands a little bit more just because I want them to feel secure. And now you have a box. So from here, now that your box is sewn, we can pull the elastic through and reshift your fabric. From here now, we are just going to close the casing, which is sewing from that point you left open to the other point. And I'm still going to pin this just to make sure that I do it right. So once I have it pinned, I am now going to take it back under the machine and sew that casing close. And now you have sewn your waistband. And now we can move on to the hem of the shorts. So we are back at the iron, and what we're going to be doing here is doing the hem. Similar to what we did at the top with the waistband, we will be pressing over 1/4 inch up, and then we'll be pressing an inch up. So here, I'm going to use my seam gauge yet again, and find 1/4, and press up 1/4 on the hem. So now I have my 1/4 hem pressed up. Now I'm going to do 1 inch press up. So I'm going to fold it over 1 inch. And press. And we will be pinning. So now we are on our last step, which is sewing the hem of the shorts. Just like you did with your waistband, you will be sewing on the 1/4 inch fold that we created. So instead of down here, it's up where you pinned. I like to start at a seam, so the inseam for this example. This is where we're going to start. Making sure you backstitch. When you get to the start, just make sure you sew over that same stitch line that you already sewed and backstitch. And repeat on the other side. Once you finish your hem, you are finished. You have a completed pair of pajama shorts.